So I just read Neferata, The Meaning of Bones by David Annandale, and it was pretty good. The book tells the story of the war between Neferata, the region under control of Neferata, and the region of Angeria, which is under the control of a Cornate demon. Furthermore, the Stormcast Eternals also play a role, and we see the return of some familiar faces from the previous Neferata book, Mortarch of Blood. I can't tell you much more without spoiling the story for you, but expect a lot of mind games, double crosses, and politics. Just as in the first book, Neferata is characterized very well, because this time the story has a much bigger focus on mind games and treachery than the first book. She seems much more cunning and deserving of her status than in the first book. In this book, you'll also see her solve most problems via intricate plans rather than just via Deus Ex Machina bullshit that dominated the previous book. Furthermore, the quotes of Neferata that were present at the start of each chapter again worked very well. As expected, the book's sequel remains very much high fantasy, which some people will enjoy while others might find it a bit too much. Fighting warriors might have an entire cacophony of lightning and fire around them as their weapons meet, while enormous magical vortexes of destruction wreak havoc on the armies. If something like this sounds cool to you, then this is a plus. If it doesn't, then there might be a downside of the book. I do want to point out that I consider the high fantasy descriptions of the world in Mortarch of Blood to be stronger than the ones in the sequel. As in the first book, they were more often used to create a setting with a certain feeling attached to it, whereas in this book they were often used more as plot devices, or just to fluff up battles. Another thing I liked was that sometimes an event would happen from the perspective of one character, only for us to travel back in time a little bit so we get to see the perspective of another character during the same event. This gave a better understanding of Neferata's mind games, while not breaking the flow of the story. Thankfully, the timeline switching of the first book is absent in The Meaning of Bones, and I consider this to be a much better alternative. Let's also talk about the side characters for a bit. In Mortarch of Blood, the side characters were fairly one-dimensional, uninteresting, and basically just served as cannon fodder to make Neferata seem cool. In this book, however, some of the characters are genuinely interesting, and I actually hope we get to see the return of some of these characters in the next book. The book also has a couple of feel-good moments when you finally see everything come together and you realize what Neferata has been planning. For me at least, this is the main reason that makes such cunning and intelligent characters interesting to read about. So again, a huge improvement over the first book. By the way, I don't think you have to read the first book in order to understand The Meaning of Bones, although on the other hand you might appreciate the sequel a bit more if you have read it. The big downside of this book is of course that it's a book about a Mortarch, so even though the book tries to make Neferata seem vulnerable at times, we as a reader know there's never any real risk. Now let's assume that for some reason the author would be allowed to let such an important character die. Nagash could probably still just bring her back with a flick of his wrist. So while this problem is something the author can't really do anything about, it does prevent the battles from becoming tense in my opinion. The addition of one particular side character did make me clench my cheeks for a bit during the final battle though, as I had grown quite attached to him. So there was at least an attempt to work around the invulnerable aura of the Mortarchs, which is something I can appreciate. All in all, I rate this book 4 out of 5 Black Library stars. If you like Neferata, it's a must read. And if you're interested in the Grand Allegiance of Death, you'll want to check this book out as well. On the other hand, if you don't like the more high fantasy side of Age of Sigmar, you probably want to read something else. One recommendation I could give then would be Gloomspite.
If you liked this video, please consider subscribing and click ringing the bell to appease the Great Horned Rat. For more lore content, please check my main channel and leave any book recommendations in the comments down below. I gotta get back to reading the next book.